To be honest, I was never super into the story of Wuthering Waves. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't like the story, because some parts of the story are actually fire. But what I really mean to say is that I, as I'm sure is the same for many of you watching, am a little bit of a story skipper. However, the most recent story to come out with the 2.5 update, and I only realized this after I finished, was the first story where I did not skip a single scene. To put it bluntly, Phrolova's story was absolute fucking cinema. Personally, I think that it is one of the, if not the best story I've ever seen presented in a gacha game. And as you can probably tell if you're watching this video, one of the reasons why I liked it so much is the massive amounts of symbolism, motifs, allusions, all of these things to poetry, to music, to language that was just everywhere in the story. Suffice to say, Kuro definitely cooked. So today what I thought I'd do is to explain some of these bits of symbolism, so hopefully you can learn something and maybe enjoy the story as much as I did. Spoilers ahead. When I first saw Phrolova's character reveal trailer after a long day of work, I was quite tired and I wasn't really paying attention until I saw something that made me start focusing immediately.
The 936th time. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whisper.
Whoa, whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
Is that the last stanza of one of my favorite poems ever? Yes, it is. Aside from one word, Phrolova's lines in the character trailer, which is repeated later in the story, is a direct quote of the final stanza of T.S. Eliot's 1925 poem, The Hollow Men. And when I saw that, that was a light bulb moment for me. Similar to how Wuthering Waves is set after a period of disaster, being the Lament, Eliot wrote many of his poems after the end of World War I, where he felt the world was spiritually dead and in a sort of paralysis. Eliot's The Hollow Men talks about how much he despises that modern people in this post-disaster environment have no mirth, have no emotion, have no spirituality. And when Phrolova laments on how Rover gave up their memories, she declares that it is these things that are most important, that constitute the spirit of humanity. Yet, there's a bit of a bitter irony here, because Eliot describes the spiritless and modern people of his poem as hollow men, as straw men. They are people. Spiritless, they are people. Illusions who look complete, but on the inside are empty and filled with straw. The paradox of Phrolova's mentality is that the people of her dream world that she desperately tries to restore, the villagers, are exactly just that. They are frequencies, feelings, illusions long past, who have exterior faces and appearances, but are devoid of sustenance. Despite this, a part of Phrolova holds on to this sort of vain hope that these hollow men can be restored, even when Rover claims that it is impossible. Just like how it is impossible to make a figure of straw turn into a living human, Phrolova continues on a sort of eternal journey to try to make an illusion a reality.
Then how can you claim my goal is unattainable?
One of the other aspects that Eliot explores in his poem, The Hollow Men, is the realm of Purgatory, the temporary space between death and heaven, where souls undergo purification before truly passing on. In essence, it is a liminal space, a boundary that exists between a person's mortal death and a true afterlife. Eliot, for instance, uses purgatory as a metaphor for describing the hollow men who have spiritually died but are not yet dead. This concept, however, was something that Eliot borrowed from Dante Alighieri's work, The Divine Comedy, where he illustrates this concept in a much more colourful manner. And considering that Rinascita is heavily inspired by Renaissance Italy, it was not surprising to me in the slightest that Kuru would make symbolic reference to what is essentially the single most famous piece of literature composed in the Italian language. Dante's Inferno is a poem that documents the poet, so his spiritual journey, from death to heaven. In Part 2, or Purgatorio, Dante describes his journey through Mount Purgatory. It is an illustration of the existing Catholic concept of purgatory that we discussed previously. And it's important to understand that in this state, he is dead, but not truly dead. And this concept of undeath, shall we call it, is essential to understanding everything about Phrolova's story. Because Phrolova herself is a dead man walking. We already know that her forte awoke when she died, and that she is essentially half human, half TD. She is no longer mortal, but halfway to death. Essentially, she is in purgatory. The frequencies of the villages that she holds onto are only empty illusions. They are effectively souls who cannot pass on and are trapped in purgatory. The tacit discords she creates out of the villages are empty shells. They are hollow men who are in a permanent state of undeath. While Dante considers that purgatory is a temporary step on the way to heaven and the afterlife, Phrolova thinks a little bit differently. In creating a world that, in her words, is a land of serenity, harmony, and perfection, a place that is to never be marred by tragedy, Phrolova's goal, to make the lost beyond a reality, is essentially to make this state of purgatory, or undeath, eternal. Phrolova's lost beyond would be a space beyond the reach of time, outside of the cycle of life and death, a space frozen in time that would be, as she says, an opus of life that lasts an eternity. In this purgatory, in the space between physical death and the afterlife, Phrolova has never succeeded in stopping the march of time, of life and death, instead replaying the same scene over and over again. I want you to watch the final lines of Phrolova's Resonator Showcase.
Death is near. Death is far. Only in an eternity freed from both life and death can that boundary dissolve.
It is her goal, then, to make an eternity free from life and death, a purgatory where she and her loved ones can live forever. On the journey up Mount Purgatory, Dante is guided by two figures, the first being the Roman poet Vergil, who represents human reason and wisdom, guiding him through hell and purgatory, and then Beatrice, who takes over near the end of the journey, who represents divine love and judgment. As we established already on how Phrolova links to purgatory, we need to quickly also understand the role of Rover in her story, because I think a lot of people tend to downplay how important they were in catalyzing her eventual spiraling and joining the Fraxidius. If we consider Phrolova as a concept that resides in purgatory, between death and the afterlife, and her story as a journey through purgatory, it actually makes a lot of sense that in the two times that Phrolova meets Rover, they fulfill both the role of Vergil and Beatrice. As we know, the past Rover only met Phrolova once, during a concert where they were able to understand the true implications of her music. This was during a time when Phrolova had not wiped their memories, and it would have most likely been any other ordinary day in their long life. However, for Phrolova, who had been crushed by fate, manipulated, and persecuted, Rover was the first voice in an eternity that understood her experience. In The Lost Beyond, we see her journal, which highlights how important Rover actually was, lamenting what experiences allowed her to understand such despair. In the Rover before the memories were erased, which, for the sake of clarity, we'll call pre-wipe and post-wipe Rover from now on, Phrolova finds an equal in understanding and someone who provides her advice from her problems and moving forward. In essence, on Phrolova's journey through Purgatory, pre-wipe Rover takes on the role of Vergil, guiding Dante through despair and hell. We can see this parallel when we see the impact that pre-wipe Rover's words have on Phrolova going forward, where she wants to know more about Rover and their insight. However, all things must come to an end. In Purgatorio, Dante must part with Vergil, as he is a pagan and cannot enter heaven, just like how Phrolova cannot meet with Rover as they have their memories wiped. In both these situations, factors outside of the character's control forcefully terminate their friendship. In this, however, we see a sort of dichotomy, where Rover feels that their single-time meeting with Phrolova was just another day, while for Phrolova it was a more so life-altering experience, which, from her journals we can tell, turned from salvation to betrayal, as Rover never returned to fulfill their promise.
I waited for a long time. I won't wait anymore.
While pre-wipe Rover takes on the role of Vergil, as you can probably guess, post-wipe Rover, or the version we actually play in the game, takes on the role of Beatrice. Both post-wipe Rover and Beatrice appear at the end of the journey of Purgatory. In Dante's Divine Comedy, we see Beatrice guiding him near the peak of the mountain, while in Phrolova's story we see post-wipe Rover meeting her again, finally near the end of her very, very long life. Here, Rover technically fulfills their promise to see Phrolova again, but now they are strangers. Considering that Phrolova is essentially physically immortal, and that one's resonance abilities are tied to their emotions, we can conclude that Phrolova can actually only die if she herself is willing to do so. And tying things together, you can see how in the story of Update 2.5, instead of offering advice as a friend like Vergil, Rover is now the divine figure of Beatrice, who intends to end Phrolova's overstayed existence in Purgatory. In the final death scene where Rover stabs her through the heart, which she is doing quite a lot of recently, we see how Phrolova is finally able to move from Purgatory and go, metaphorically, to paradise. In the final scene of her death, Phrolova and the lost souls of her village pass into the Lost Beyond through what seems to be a broken painting or a door. Though this is a little suspect, I believe that this is a parallel to Dante's multifoliate, or Divine Rose. In his Divine Comedy, this supposed rose is a scene that grants him at the end of his journey in Paradiso, at the Empyrean, otherwise known as a final stage of heaven. In essence, what this rose symbolically represents is the ultimate heaven, or the ultimate final paradise. However, in Dante's version, the Divine Rose is made up of a procession of angels, while Phrolova's entrance to the Lost Beyond mirrors it in shape but is made of broken glass. My theory for this is that Because the Lost Beyond is incomplete, as, in the end, Phrolova was never able to secure the gem, it means that instead of making the Lost Beyond a reality, she merged with it instead, making it essentially an unfinished world. Alternatively, you can also see that the broken glass of the door represents a sort of falsity, an illusion, essentially. While Dante's Divine Rose is made up of angels, Phrolova's Lost Beyond is inhabited by the villagers who may be a world of fake or false angels, but angels nevertheless. Phrolova has stated multiple times through the story that she does not care if her reality is an illusion, only that she can see those she lost once again. Regardless, no matter how we see this door, or how false we deem her supposed paradise to be, and no matter how much Rover deems her insane and irrational, the one truth that remains is that the Lost Beyond remains as Phrolova's Empyrean, her sacred place, and her highest heaven. When you enter the Lost Beyond after the story's conclusion, you'll be greeted with an achievement that reads, Il aurait suffi. It would have been enough. Phrolova's name has a lot of ways of being understood, but my leading theory so far, and take this of course with a grain of salt, is that her name is Russian for the wise man. Frol meaning wise man, and Orva being a female suffix. Considering that at this point, I'm almost certain that someone at Kura Games is a T.S. Eliot fan, my interpretation of this is that Frolova's name is a reference to another one of his poems, specifically The Journey of the Magi, written in 1927. The Journey of the Magi tells the story of the Magi, the three wise men who followed the star of Bethlehem to the birth of Jesus. In this poem, Eliot uses his Christian mythos as a metaphor for the journey of self-discovery. When the Magi witness the birth of Jesus Christ, the transformative nature of the experience causes them to feel both disillusionment at what they once believed in, as well as rebirth as they find a new purpose. This fits perfectly within Phrolova's story after she met pre-wipe Rover for the first time. Although she presents the story in fragments, we know enough to infer that she felt betrayed after Rover failed to keep their promise, fueling her disillusionment long enough to join the Fraxidius to find new meaning and purpose. Phrolova's new path from the Fraxidius in the absence of Rover fulfilling her promise is a parallel of the Magi, or the wise men, in Eliot's poem. Instead of clinging to emotion and what she once knew of old, she is instead transitioned to a new, cold efficiency to fulfill her goals.
What you and your cronies hold dear is but a jest to the Fraxidus. No bond lasts forever. Without true loyalties, there can be no betrayal, no deceit. I no longer buy into such illusions.
One of the key aspects of Phrolova's story, as well as her skills and kit, is the use of musical symbolism. Most of Phrolova's skills tie musical themes into the overarching symbols we've already talked about. Before we talk about some of these themes, however, we need to understand some terminology. Firstly, an Italian overture is a free movement orchestra used as an opening to an opera, and it always follows a fast, slow, fast format. A movement is just a self-contained piece of the symphony, sort of like a chapter in a book. A sonata is also a free movement piece, but is generally written for a single instrument, almost always being a piano, but sometimes also for the violin. It is generally used as the opening movement to a symphony. A rhapsody is a piece generally characterized by its lack of formalized structure. They change tempo, mood, and theme throughout the piece. A waltz is a piece of music always written in triple time and meant to be danced to in a pair with the rhythm. Dance for a waltz is always danced in a circular pattern around a dance floor. Now, if we look at the Phrolova's skills and kit, we can see how these concepts actually tend to work together. Her basic attacks are called the movement of life and death, and consist of 3 attacks which represent the 3 movements within the sonata. You can interpret, for example, that the first attack is the beginning of life, the second, the journey, and the third attack being death itself. Her basic attacks lead into a forte circuit called Rhapsody of a New World. You can build her forte circuit in a few different ways. If you only use basic attacks, you will get a red note, which gives Phrolova a damage multiplier. If you use her resonance skill, it groups the enemies, and if you use both in quick succession, you get a shiny, bold note, which gives both buffs. This is symbolic of a rhapsody, which itself is built in distinct ways, with each note representing its own theme. Finally, after the forte circuit, you unlock her ultimate, named Waltz of Forsaken Depths. Phrolova's ult has her jump into the air and have Hecate dance with the opponents, which mirrors how a waltz is supposed to be danced in a pair. Hecate will perform 2 basic attacks and the third will be replaced with an enhanced basic, thus representing the triple time of the waltz and her dancing within rhythm to the music. This will then complete her rotation. At this point, it's important for us to go back to the Italian overture, and it is important as well to remember that it is an opening piece to an opera, not a whole, meaning that it is a sort of introduction that sets the themes for the story to come. This leads into the name of Phrolova's outro skill, aptly being named Unfinished Piece. Much like how an Italian overture was meant to be an introduction and not a complete story, it mirrors her journey and the lost beyond itself. As we talked about previously in the section about the broken glass door and the divine rose, Phrolova was not able to get the gem and make the lost beyond a reality. Her heaven and her journey is essentially incomplete. Additionally, in her story soundtrack, The Lost Beyond, many of the previous symbols we talked about also tie together quite nicely. Phrolova makes constant reference to the reverie, otherwise known as a fleeting or forgetful daydream, with her merging with the lost beyond being the final piece to fall into place. In the second stanza, we can see the yearning that she holds for this illusion, even if it is false and perfumed. We've already established that Phrolova knows and doesn't care if her paradise is an illusion, which shows that she holds onto feelings and memories even if the people that inhabited them are long dead. The final musical reference we'll cover is her signature weapon called the Lethean Elegy. An elegy is a poem or song that laments the dead, which is why when Phrolova performs it, she is clad in black. The understanding of Lethean, which connotes forgetfulness, comes from the river Lethe, which was one of the 5 rivers of the Greek underworld. The river, which would wipe the memories of anyone who drank from it, parallels to Rover, who lost their memories voluntarily, as well as the erosion of memory within Phrolova's eternal paradise, where the sun never sets. The river Lethe is also the final river to cross before a soul is reincarnated, which matches with Phrolova in the Update 2.5 story being essentially at the end of her journey through Purgatory. As the key echo that matches Phrolova's theme, and the one she uses in combat for basically half her attacks, it is inevitable that Hecate also plays a big part in her symbolism. Hecate, a goddess in Greek mythology, is a bit of an enigma, because she is perhaps one of the only powerful major goddesses of the Greek pantheon, where no one can actually agree on what exactly she represents or does. However, there are still some general things that most people agree on when it comes to Hecate. First off, Hecate is often associated with magic and witchcraft. For instance, if you ever did Macbeth in high school, for example, you would know that Hecate is a leader of the 3 witches. Phrolova's use of a wand and her resonance abilities in controlling TDs can be effectively interpreted as a sort of magic and witchcraft. Secondly, and this is probably the most important, is that Hecate is a goddess that governs over liminal spaces and crossroads. Essentially, she controls boundaries in between things, such as in the case of Phrolova, the boundary between life and death. The reason this is important is that Purgatory, as we discussed previously, is also a liminal concept that Hecate essentially controls, being a boundary that exists between the death and the afterlife. Phrolova, like Hecate, always lives an existence in between or on the edge of things. Thirdly, Hecate as a goddess of liminal spaces and boundaries is also often depicted as guiding souls to the afterlife, with some versions showing her with necromantic powers. This mirrors Phrolova's attempts at controlling life and death, with her vision of resurrecting the villagers being able to be interpreted as essentially a form of necromancy, in her attempt to make an eternal purgatory to reverse death itself. Phrolova essentially takes on a god-like ambition. However, like Icarus, who flew too close to the sun, Phrolova is essentially punished for her hubris, as she fails to acquire the gem, and her vision of the lost beyond remains broken and incomplete. To finish off the video, we will make one final but important stop of one of the major symbols behind Phrolova's story and character, the spider lily, or otherwise known the licorice flower. Licorice, a Greek word meaning twilight, is in itself also a liminal concept like purgatory. Like how twilight borders both day and night, the spider lily is both a symbol of beauty and death, a paradoxical contrast that is basically molded into Phrolova's story and design. When we see how the flower is incorporated into her weapon, the Lethean Elegy, for instance, we can relate how the spider lily symbolizes death and passing, often growing near graveyards and believed to mark the path to the afterlife, hence the elegy. The licorice flower is also special in that it only blooms for a couple of days before wilting. This temporary beauty is a painful symbolism, especially because Phrolova's entire goal is to turn a temporary moment of purgatory, being that of her village, into what is an eternal paradise. Like the spider lily, her attempts are ultimately futile as she fails in an attempt to resurrect the villagers, only coming home when she dies and joins them. Managed to watch the video all the way to the end. Thank you. I really appreciate it. There's a lot of small symbolism that I didn't end up putting in. For example, the mention of Ouroboros in the Resonator showcase, and the fact that Phrolova's town is called Ostina when you ask Pia after the story's conclusion. But I decided to make a video on this story and this character, essentially, because it was just so full of symbolism that I couldn't not do so, especially compared to all the characters before it, which did not have this level of sophistication and detail. So all in all, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and well, okay Kuro, you win.
Pieces have fallen into place. I've been craving to touch at you like moonlight stroking your face.